Hey, it's Amir Borman. This is the daily 10 segment of the Talent Tango podcast. And next to me is Arash. And we want to
Hello.
talk about the internal external dynamics. Obviously, we're external, we work with a lot of internal people. I think, there is
The good,
a,
bad, and ugly.
yeah, I mean, there's slight friction, obviously, right? I think there's different views of external recruiters, and I think sometimes external recruiters have created that by commoditizing their efforts, and not necessarily being the best service provider, being the best business problem, solving type entity. I think most of them, are focused on resume, resume, resume without understanding the core. And I
Sure.
think I think sometimes what happens is as you progress, some companies do grab and take hold of the process because they want to own it, and there's even a bigger gap between where you're at by and where the internal people are by cutting you out of some of the interviews and some of the process. And I think it's even more difficult to provide value to the internal team once you've taken a step back. So I think today we're really focusing on you know external agencies want to provide value. They should be providing value, and more importantly, they should be solving this as a business problem. It shouldn't be that the resume is the chief objective. It should be understanding what business problems they're trying to solve by that person taking the job.
Yeah, I mean, I think that helps framework and get a better understanding. Like if you were internal as that external person, right? I think the more you can be an extension of that internal team, that's only going to help. I think when you're looking at it from a partnership, I think there's definitely potentially some bias on both ends and assumptions made on both ends. Definitely, external recruiters make assumptions about internal folks. So I think kind of having open dialogue about what you actually need from your partner, both ways, right? What do you need from us as an agency? And what do you need internally? Like those questions, I don't think always get asked. It's simply, I can't fill this role. It's really hard. Can you help? And then you go off and do whatever you need to do in that capacity. I don't think that next level of intimacy, I think, it just a lot of times doesn't get uh, put into the mix.
Well, I mean, obviously, when you're representing a client and they get paid based on compensation, and you're representing them, there is a fair amount of maybe bias that can be introduced. You want to win, right? You want your candidate to get the
Sure.
job. So I think there's a certain amount of I understand that piece, but I think when you're already working with somebody and you want a deeper partnership, I think the more coordination there is, the more you are brought in like a true extension of the internal team, what they know, so that you could properly represent the organization to the best ability you can. I think that so I know, that becomes the paramount. So I know, like, in an RPO situation, you literally are embodying the organization.
Sure.
I think more contingent recruiters could probably take those same concepts and embody that true extension without having to have, an RPO agreement
Yeah, I
for
think
them.
it depends what that specific in-house team needs from you, right? Is it purely top of funnel? Like they could actually care less about you managing the process for them with the candidate. They just need more top of funnel, right? So I think without addressing and understanding what really that internal team needs, regardless of their size, right? Then it's hard to identify how you as an agency can add value, right? Because you might have areas of value add but they really don't need it. So it doesn't do you any
Well, you have
good
to
that,
understand the
that's the
business
area.
problem you're solving, right?
Exactly,
So if the
right.
business problem is I just need candidates, and you understand that, and you can articulate you just need top of the funnel candidates, then at least the relationships it's established that, listen, you tag in, you leave, that's all we need. And that becomes, and then you as the external recruiter know exactly the time commitment they need, the level of
Sure.
commitment they need. So I think when you know the business problem you're solving, right? You're coming in as top of funnel producer of candidates, they don't have time, or hey, I really need you to, whatever, X, Y, and Z, then that becomes your course of action.
Yeah, well, I think there's two relationships to me. One is with you as the external recruiter or agency and the internal. And then there's this the big component is the candidate. I had a candidate ask me yesterday, well, so should I be following up with you or should I be following up with them directly? Because this one specific client kind of takes over the process. And I said, look, they're gonna be kinda your main point of contact moving forward. They kinda, own the life cycle of the interview. However, I'm still here and very involved and definitely can add a lot of value to you and to the client. So I think it's keeping in mind that there's another person that's involved in this kind of communication circle and knowing kind of how your client wants to communicate and what their preferences are. Again, it's going to really help kind of all those streamline the process. I just think more effectively and efficiently.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you can articulate the process up front, here's how you're going to engage, right? Any services engagement, and this is how you're going to engage. You understand your role in that engagement. You understand the stakeholders involved. And again, you're right. The candidate obviously doesn't want to feel like they're not sure who to turn to. But I think then, as you get, if this is less defined and the further you get, that's when things fall apart. And the worst email an agency recruiter can get, not the worst, but it's something that's difficult is the candidate client comes back and goes, "Hey, do you know what's going on with this candidate?" And you're like, I mean, you've taken over. You've
Right.
very basically cut me out." So, the expectation is you're still kind of following up, but even though the candidate's really now engaged with the client, that puts us in a difficult spot. Not to say that, you shouldn't be following up anyways, but there's a little bit of separation there that the candidate feels a little bit more comfortable not having to respond to 2 people, yeah, especially if they're interviewing with multiple places.
Yeah, I mean, I think candidates typically don't want to have the same repeat conversation, right? I've already
Yeah.
discussed with the client my salary expectations or what my activity is now, rather than when they initially spoke to you 2 weeks ago. Obviously, things could have changed, right? So, to your point, I agree. Your job is most likely to stay in touch with the candidate, right? As an external recruiter that sourced that candidate. It's just depending on how the client takes over, and then how they take over and how you interact with the client as they take over, right? So sometimes you're just in the dark, right? And you want to know, should I be providing more candidates, but you don't now have that line of communication. So I think it's trying to establish some of those rules of engagement early on, even if a client does take over and say, hey, look, that's great, but we should try to set up a 1 week touch base or biweekly, or some form of staying in touch so everybody's in the same loop. Because I think when you're not sitting in that, HR recruiting team, cubicle space or office space, you're a little bit out of the loop
Of
already.
course.
So don't alienate yourself even more. Try to get yourself more, into the mix and stay in touch and make sure those line of communications are definitely open.
Yeah, and it goes back to I think the partnership level, knowing what business role, business problem you're there to solve for them, right? Your service provider. What level of service are they looking for?
Sure.
What's the process? Who takes over at what point? I think the more those are defined and talked out loud up front, because a lot of times it's like, hey, go through the intake, you know what they're looking for, all that stuff, and it's like you get the interview, right? You understand the interview process from the candidate's perspective, how to provide submissions. But then it's like, hey, as you guys progress, how are you going to want to handle this? Let's say we get to I mean, I think, sometimes depending on the client, how much time you have, you ask the questions, but sometimes it does change. And all of a sudden you're left kind of trying to figure out, okay, well, I need to now jump in, jump out. They decide to take over. They've changed, the view of it. But either way, I think a good external recruiter should be as embedded as they can, obviously, because again, going back to you have the vested interest of wanting to close, and I think that's where it all comes down is you got to still manage your own book as an external person.
Yeah. And I think on top of that is you know, getting to the offer, right? That's critical to know who and what. How does that work? Do you guys present it? Does the hiring manager present it? Like, how does
Do you need
that?
a verbal to trigger an offer? I mean, like
Yeah,
those are all the nuances of the more you know. I mean, that's going to help.
yeah, no, I agree. So I think it's trying to establish rules of engagement so you can best add value to your clients.
Yep, absolutely. How are you guys, I guess, internal, external, how are you guys trying to make sure that partnership's deeper? What are you doing up front to make sure everyone is on the same page? Let us know. Leave us some feedback. Leave us a review, and we'll be back again.
Bye.